Welcome to DevJams, where we discuss amazing projects that were done by Cloudinary's developer community. And frankly, those projects are inspiring, innovative, or just things that we think are worth some attention. My name is Sam Brace, and I am the Director of Customer Education for Cloudinary. And joining me for this episode, and frankly, every episode, is Becky Peltz, who works with me on the customer education team. Becky, it's great to have you again.
Hey, it's good to be here, and I really enjoy this episode. It was inspiring to me, and I also really appreciate the way that Chris created an app where he sort of did a little tricks to get Cloudinary involved, and it kind of goes along with his CSS tricks. So this is a lot of fun to watch.
I completely agree. And it's definitely a case where what Chris and also our guest host, Eric, who works also with us at Cloudinary, but is truly an amazing developer, evangelist, enthusiast, advocate in his own right, what these two people bring to this episode is, in my opinion, a wonderful thing. And what Chris is going to walk through in this episode, showing us how he was able to build a microsite associated with his main CSS-Tricks.com site, and showing how he was able to do things where they were able to work with Netlify and serverless functions, being able to take screenshots of various code samples on the web using a service called Puppeteer, and also even using static site generators such as Eleventy. There's a lot that can be unpackaged here of this episode, because what this is starting to show are lots of interesting ways that you can start working with Cloudinary, working with APIs when you're going and building that first or third or 15th Jamstack project. I think there's a lot of learning nuggets that's associated with this overall episode. And I'm really glad that Chris, as well as Eric, was able to share a lot of that here.
Yeah, I think developers are really excited about Jamstack now. It's like we went from everything was on the server to full stack, and now we've got Jamstack. And trying to understand that is very important now, I think. And I think this sheds a little light on that, what you can do. And again, inspired me.
And so let's jump right into it and take the time to hear what Chris has gone and built using Cloudinary, and also some of the other things that they talk about. There's a few things that I think you definitely will want to pay attention to as you start getting into this episode, such as one of the things that Eric goes and shows is some of the capabilities with Cloudinary transformations, and also some of the ways that we can now transform to AVIF, which is a very bleeding edge format for image delivery. So lots of things that you can unpackage of this. Let's take the time to go through it. Without any further ado, here's Chris. Chris, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
It's really, really good, because I think we're going to have a great conversation about some of the amazing things that you've been able to accomplish in this project that we're focusing on here. But before we dive into all those details, because that's really why we're here, I do want to take the chance to introduce our special guest host for this particular episode, which is Eric Portis, who works with me and Becky here at Cloudinary, but in a different department, in a different role. But Eric also is someone that I'm always amazed at the things that he does. So I'm very privileged to have him here. I think Becky would say the same. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Now, Eric, why are you here? What do you ultimately do for Cloudinary? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm in the office of the CTO, which is a fancy sounding title, but my particular role is web platform advocate. So I'm supposed to be kind of a bridge between Cloudinary and the people making decisions about the whole web platform. So, I try to actually shape some specs and make them go the direction that we want them to go to make the web a better place for images. And, make sure that Cloudinary is staying on top of the latest stuff that's happening in the world of browsers and specs too. And why am I here? I have a good relationship with Chris, and me and Eleventy go way back. The project we're going to be talking about is focused on a static site generator, Eleventy, that Chris is using. And yeah, I love it. And I love the way Chris is using it. And I'm excited to talk about it.
This is one thing that I love about Eric, because he's just so humble. But there's a lot behind this, of course, where I remember I learned about Eric way back in 2014 when I was reading Smashing Magazine and I read an article about responsive images, and I was like, this is just very well done. So it's one of those cases where it's like, oh, if we're going to be talking about images on the web at all, I think we're in good hands having Eric as well as Chris in this case. There's a lot to ultimately unpack with these two very, very smart individuals here. And with that said, Chris, talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing, some of the things that you come across in case people are not familiar with you coming into this episode.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think in the context of this show, the most relevant thing is CSS Tricks, which is just a blog I've had for a long time, not quite 2 decades, but getting there, I guess. And there was a blog post that a guest author pitched me not that long, 6 months ago. And then the idea was like, let's put together one of those, speaking of Smashing Magazines, or a list post with all the best coding fonts, which is, kind of a cheesy article, but also sometimes kind of fun. Sometimes if you're looking for something like that, you're almost like in the mood for that. Show me a list post. Show me the 12 hottest coding fonts, And I was like, you know what? If you're going to do this, that's cool. Not our bread and butter style post, but let's go for it. But I want you to do a really good job. I want you to make the list really curated and have them actually be actually good coding fonts, not just you lightly Googled it for 2 seconds and came up with the list and barfed it into a blog post. I want there to be like a curated list. And I think that you should, take really good screenshots of them, highlighting why they're good. I want you to be able to talk about them, just like set some parameters in place for this guest author. And they actually did a pretty good job of all that. But then as things do, sometimes it just kind of pittered out, like you don't hear back and, whatever. And ultimately they stayed kind of involved with the thing. But I was like, I was so picky about what I asked for in this post that it made me think like I should probably just be involved and do it, And sometimes technological things like the cards just kind of fall into place with other stuff that you're working on. I've been into, not like deeply, but playing with it enough, Puppeteer, which is like a programmatic way to control Chrome, the browser, and people use it for kind of all sorts of things, but there's some really big use cases for it. One of them is like running tests on your code, like go to cloudinary.com, click the login button. Did a modal show up? Yes. Good. Your test passes. You're allowed to push code now, That's like one big use case for it. Another really big use case for it is go to this URL and take a picture of it and give me a PNG or whatever. I don't even know what it'll spit out, but it spits out something. Now you have an image, Okay, cool. So if we're going to do this coding font thing, maybe we set up an HTML file and a CSS file that loads up that coding font in with some like nice example code. And we'll do this the same for each font. That way it's a 1-to-1 comparison that we're looking at. And we'll tell Puppeteer to take a screenshot of that. So now we can code ourselves up a programmatic way to take a bunch of screenshots of these coding fonts, which is what I wanted for the blog post. But if you're going to do that, it's like you might as well put it on GitHub because that's where like all the code goes these days, And then I was like, it doesn't take that much to leap from that to like, let's just put a little navigation together for it. So you can click between the different fonts and stuff. And then from there, it's not much of a leap to be like, you know what, screw it. Let's just make a whole website for it, So that was the idea behind that. I don't know if you exactly asked me that, but that's what kind of brought us here.
It is what brought us here, absolutely. Ultimately, the project that we're talking about has a very big tie to this project that you're talking about, CSS Tricks. So absolutely in this case. But other things that you've worked on, CodePen, of course, I'm sure many people that are watching this episode have done something with CodePen when they're trying to display HTML or work with CSS or JavaScript or just show working code in a live environment. You're behind a lot of that.
Yeah, well, I'm a co-founder of CodePen. Yeah. Also a project getting on in the years, so we're working hard on that. So yeah, if you've seen CodePen, that's me too. I do some podcasting myself too, hence the microphone and such on a show called Shop Talk Show with my friend Dave Rupert. So that's it. It's just those 3 things.
But it ultimately is a really good segue to be able to show, like, not only is this a case where we have an expert when it comes to this project that we're talking about, but you're also someone that is extremely well versed in the web, understands web development from many different angles. So I think there's a lot that our audience members are going to be able to take away from this
That's
conversation.
right. I do.
Yeah. Good job, Chris.
It's exploding. Yeah.
So talk to us about the project. So obviously this is something where Eric mentioned this is dealing with Eleventy. This is dealing with potentially ways to work with content that is locally stored, not web accessible. We're using Cloudinary for portions of it. There's a lot of interesting aspects about this. Let's start unraveling some of those parts.
Yeah, well, I looped in the Puppeteer thing right away because that was kind of fundamental to the idea of the project. The project, again, is coding-fonts.css-tricks.com, and I just call it a microsite because I don't know if that has an official definition or anything, but I've been partial to turning little ideas like this into little entire websites. I've done it a couple of times now. I did one that's at serverless.css-tricks.com and one that's at conferences.css-tricks.com. And it's like when an idea has a little bit more life to it, I end up slapping it at a subdomain because it's like, I don't know, it's a nice place for them and they can be kind of CSS Tricks branded, but yet use a bit of technology that isn't tied to anything else. Like CSS Tricks is a WordPress site and kind of like proudly so, but it doesn't mean that every single other thing I ever want to build in my life is also a WordPress thing, you know? These subdomains then can become a repo. They can be hosted wherever because DNS can just point wherever, you know? So some of them are like, for example, on Netlify. And that's cool because I like Netlify and I like the Jamstack approach and I like the static generator approach sometimes. So, this is just an example of one of those little projects that I just kind of get a kick out of. And now I have kind of like a little way that I do them that gives them some consistency.
There are so many static site generators. How did you pick Eleventy?
Yeah, in a way it's because I kind of don't care. Like it could have been, there literally is hundreds of them and I could just pick one off a shelf. In a way, it doesn't matter to me, but Eleventy's got good press, a lot of people are into it. And there's one dude behind it named Zach Leatherman, and Zach's just a really nice guy and he did a good job with it. And I happen to be in a Slack with him. So if I need to ask him questions, I can just do that. That's a pretty good, those are enough reasons for me to pick it, always, unless I have a really strong reason not to, So it's just kind of my go-to one. And then, like any other piece of technology, the more you pick it, the more you just know it. So then there's even less reason to pick anything else because you just already know how that one works. So it's kind of fine. But static site generators in general, the only reason I used one at all in this case, and in literally the case of all these microsites, is because they can be a public repo on GitHub. I mean, it could be anywhere else, but GitHub's just where the action is, And more than just being on GitHub, that's nice that it's on GitHub. So you could take pull requests for hey, I fixed this thing. Here's a typo. Let me fix this accessibility thing. That's great and all, but what really mattered to me is that the content itself is also on GitHub. So with these static site generators, this is not required. Your static site generator can hook up to cloud databases, and I can do all kinds of fancy stuff these days, but I on purpose didn't do that. I put all the content as just markdown files in it. So in the case of this site that we're talking about, all these fonts have a markdown file that represent them. They say, this is a font. It's called Operator Mono. It's got a bunch of metadata in it. It's by this designer. It's by this foundry. This is the license. This is what it costs. Does it have ligatures or not? But it has all this information in the markdown file. Now, if somebody else wants to add one to this site, they make a markdown file in that same format and submit it to the repository, and I accept the pull request probably, unless it's a garbage font or you did a bad job or something.
Oh, yeah, because people say Jamstack, Jam is JavaScript APIs and markup, and I'm like, why would you use markup if you can use Markdown? Why would they call it markup?
I think that's actually a confusing. Yes, you're not alone in that confusion, and it doesn't mean that. The markup in the case of Jamstack just means anything that produces HTML, and then people get confused the other direction too. And they say, oh, if Jamstack, then does that mean I'm forced to use Markdown? And that's also not true. It's like, no, I don't know. It's just, I think that got a little messed up in people's heads a little bit. But I think the concept of it is more just like pre-render, get stuff into static HTML files and ship that. However that happens is fine. The point is there's not like a PHP server or something spitting out that stuff. That's what Jamstack doesn't mean. But that content model, this wasn't a gamble, because this has already proven itself to me time and time again. That serverless site that I mentioned, there must be hundreds of pull requests on it for the content for that site. Like, it works. At least it works for me, which is pretty cool. If I could take pull requests on content for CSS tricks, I probably would. It's just WordPress doesn't really have a good story for that, I wish they did, but they just kind of don't. And I don't know. I just think that's really neat. And in fact, that world is very much evolving too. There's things like the Netlify CMS that you can attach to this thing and give people the barrier to entry for like a nerd site, say, hey, it's on GitHub, do pull requests there. That's great if you're dealing with other developers who are familiar with that, but even that door is starting to get knocked down a little bit. And you can say, here, if you want to add some content or change some content to the site, here's a UI to do it, which opens the door a little bit wider to pull requests. But I'm bullish on the idea of allowing other people to suggest changes and add content to websites. And that's not, I don't know if that's fundamental to Jamstack, but it just so happens that works really nicely in that world. And I'm all about it. I mean, I launched this thing only a couple weeks ago, and there's been tons of contributions already. Fixes and new content and stuff. In fact, most of the contributions have been content, which is exactly what I want,
As someone who contributed a conference to your conferences site, I can say from experience that the bar is very low. It's very easy to submit. And it's fun. It's somewhere between like a wiki page and a curated list. It's not quite as Wild West as a wiki, but not quite as locked down as a CSS tricks post. So,
basically, I get an email from GitHub that says, somebody made a PR. And I'm like, looks good. Click button.
Yeah.
I mean, chances are I might fix a little. Yeah.
This is your first foray into accepting image content, though, right? Like the whole screenshot setup, I'm pretty impressed with how you design that and how easy it is to actually run. But that's a whole other kettle of fish than asking people to author Markdown.
It is. And so the bar is a lot higher here. I wasn't sure what I was going to get because it's not just, in this one case of this site, it's not just put a Markdown file in a folder and submit the pull request. Maybe it could be someday, because as you know, things like GitHub Actions and stuff, it could be as fancy as the pull request has information in the Markdown file that runs a GitHub action, which runs Puppeteer, which generates images, which you upload to Cloudinary, or it could be that. That's where the web is headed. That's some weird stuff. In this case, I ask people to run it locally. So there's information in the contributing, in the README file, it says, would you like to add a font to this thing? I need you to make a Markdown file. I actually also need you to make a CSS file that links up your font and stuff. And at the command line, you gotta, npm install, and then you gotta type out a command that says, please take the screenshots for this thing. And it really, it's not particularly lightweight. When you npm install, it's going to pull down Puppeteer, which is a full-on copy of Chrome and all this stuff. But people have been doing it. And theoretically, you just wait. You type the command and you just sit there for a minute, depending on what platform you're on. Like I'm on a Mac here, you'll see a little icon for Chrome pop up in the dock, and you're like, whoa, what's that? Fancy. Oh, that's automated Chrome being run and producing images. And they get placed in the right place, so you don't have to move them around or do anything. They just appear where they should appear. And then rock and roll. Your PR is kind of ready to go. But this is where some Cloudinary tech and Eleventy tech and smooshing around needed to happen, because, of course, when they're adding a font and they're working locally, they can run a little local server and look at the complete site on their local machine. And so that's fine, but the images need to be linked up, the images of the font. And I guess the fundamental problem is in production, we wanted to serve them from Cloudinary, but we can't do that locally because those images, they only exist on that user's machine. I guess locally through an API or something, we could have them uploaded to Cloudinary, but I just didn't want to go there. That adds even more complexity to the party. The fetch API for Cloudinary is perfect for stuff like this. Just like this image is ultimately going to be at a canonical URL somewhere on the web. Cloudinary is more than capable of just yanking that down and displaying it. Let's just wait till it's on production to do that. But that leaves the local story like shrug emoji, like what are we going to do locally then? And the answer is actually pretty simple. It's like, because the Cloudinary fetch API is just a URL prefix, it's like it's either there or it's not. So on production it's there, on dev it's not. That's it,
So just to clarify, are you even uploading the image to GitHub, or is the image always just on the local machine until it gets fetched?
It does go to GitHub, which is questionable. Like maybe we shouldn't. I know that, I don't know if I can speak super intelligently about that, but I think there's something called like Git LFS that's like an opportunity for you to not put the images directly into your Git repo, which has the advantage then of that Git repository being very lightweight instead of like all these binary images being in the Git repo. I don't know enough about that to even go there.
This is a good point, though, because in training, I've put images on GitHub and had this kind of guilty feeling. And I'm wondering when GitHub is going to get into managing images or, having someone manage.
That's a good point.
I think many people, we are working with images and video now that they are going to end up there.
And then here's something that you'd want to avoid is that I could, with Puppeteer or other command line utilities, write code such that, okay, take a really big screenshot, then take a medium one, then take a small one, put them all in the folder, and upload all of those to GitHub too, which is like, that's even more complexity, even more weight for the repo, just more stuff to go wrong. Because I'll tell you, Puppeteer is not the most super duper reliable thing in the world. There's just going to be random failures. It'll just run and it'll take 5 out of 6 of them. And you'll be like, cool. And the only way to know to fix it is just run it again. And maybe you'll get all 6 of them this time, So there's that. And if you turn 6 into 18, there's just going to be all the more failures, So that was kind of a bummer. But the idea is now, this is just how I think, and it's been for years now, because Cloudinary exists, take the biggest one you can. Make it 10,000 pixels wide. Who cares, Because you're never going to serve it like that. You're only going to serve it through a Cloudinary URL, which resizes it to the correct size anyway. So you might as well make the canonical one that will never be downloaded ever just enormous, So that's what we do. Although in this case, I don't think we make it enormous. I mean, there's no reason to just shoot the biggest one you need,
And that enormous one is what people are looking at locally when they run without the fetch prefix. And then when
because who cares locally,
Right. But then once it goes up into Cloudinary, you have some nice URL prefixes that shrink things down and some responsive image markup to make sure that people only get the pixels that they need.
Yeah, exactly. That way you can do that responsive images syntax easily because you just change the fetch params to be the right size. Like it'd be the 1200 one, the 800 one, the 400 one, whatever it is. There's a lot on a project like this. I admit I just kind of like pull some numbers out of my head and go for it. I didn't exactly do a lot of analyzing math, but at least we're not serving absolutely enormous images to tiny devices and stuff. I'm sure it's helpful to some degree at least. But that means it's an extra lie on local. I didn't write the code so complex that it doesn't serve responsive images markup on local. It does. It's the same source for all of them. So it's just big fat lie.
Yeah. The browser says, I'll go and pick the smallest of these images and then loads a gigantic image.
The biggest one. But again, on localhost, who cares? That's not the story. But they do, it's funny, the more images that get added to the project, if anybody wants to contribute, one of the step ones is to clone the repo, and they got to sit there and pull down hundreds of images, Not super ideal, but hey, what are you going to do? That's just common to any project, really.
So I think there could be someone watching this video who might not know what we mean by fetch, because fetch is also like a term for Ajax, going out and fetching something. Do you want to talk about fetch and how you got connected to this in Cloudinary?
That's funny. Is fetch kind of is Ajax, isn't it? Like there's a real literal fetch API in JavaScript. Yeah, I mean, you all can speak to it better than I can. What I think of Cloudinary fetch is like there's kind of two ways to link to an image on Cloudinary. One of them is I've uploaded it directly. I use the media library or the API or something, and the canonical image lives on Cloudinary itself. That is where the image is. I think that's kind of cool that you offer that, because it opens the door for projects that don't have any other canonical home. Like if I was going to build an app absolutely from scratch and have an upload your own avatar capability, I might use Cloudinary to do that, because that's where the home for those images can be. Like, why not? At least I don't have to think about where else they can go. I don't know how common that is. I think it's in the world of circles of web dev I live in, it's probably more common that you're going to put that storage somewhere that theoretically you feel like you have more control over, although control is just an illusion, isn't it? But you'd probably put it in like an S3 bucket. Like, I'm going to upload an avatar, I'm going to put that in an S3 bucket, and then when I actually use it on the web, I'll prefix the URL to it through Cloudinary. So I guess when I say Cloudinary fetch, it means you're using this special URL format that Cloudinary offers that you put before the URL to your canonical image, and then the magic happens. Cloudinary ultimately ends up serving it, but in a split second, it has to go get the original first and catch it on their side.
Following up what you said, when you upload, you get this unique identifier from Cloudinary, but when you fetch, the URL you're fetching becomes the unique identifier.
That's the unique identifier? Oh, I didn't even know that. That's some behind the scenes stuff.
There is something up there in your media library, but it's just, it's got a public ID of your...
Yeah, because you can still find them in your media library, right? They still get there. It's just not like, you don't have to think of it like as canonically there.
Yeah, you didn't have to go through the media library to upload it, and you didn't have to write any code and exposure AP, your credentials.
No. You know what's interesting to me about it though, that I have to, like, let's say there's like we change something like a typo or whatever, or like change like what the code that's going to be in the screenshot, be like, oh, I forgot to put a closing div in there or something for the screenshot I'm trying to take of the code. If I rerun Puppeteer and take new screenshots and send them up, they won't be right on production because the URL didn't change. So people that had it cached on the Cloudinary side, it's not that. What's cool is I can go into the media library, find it quick, and just delete them. That way it'll grab the new ones. Or, probably even better, just because it would be easier, would be to, every time that runs locally, just increment something. So the query parameter is off by one or something. Stick
a V with a date string in it or something.
Exactly that. Yeah. It would be bad news for Cloudinary that if I made the query string different every page load or something. Now I'm caching like hundreds of images of these. That's not good for your build probably. So don't do that. But change it when the actual image changes. That's fine.
But you kind of bring out another good thing about using fetch is you get your image out on the CDN, and now it's available geographically, locally, all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if you could share this information, but like, is most of Cloudinary usage through fetch, or half, or what? It's amazing to me to think about. Like, is it popular or not?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but it's a great question. And now I'm probably going to want to go ask somebody who might know. But there are some other ways, to even besides fetch. There's, we've talked about this auto upload. Have you explored that?
Auto upload?
Yeah.
No, I don't think.
In which case you actually set up a configuration and you map to a remote location, and then you can just use your mapping key to grab things.
Mm-hmm. Then you have your own canonical image still, but it's like, which one's canonical then?
Yeah, it actually moves the image in, and the key is however you've mapped it with whatever the name of the original file is. So
it's the ability that it can live on Cloudinary by itself seems unique. There's other I don't know, players in this market seem to only do the fetch. They're like, we'll only stand in front of your canonical images. But it's kind of cool that Cloudinary can be the canonical source too. It's nice that it kind of goes both ways.
A long time ago, when Eleventy was very young, I wrote a little short code for it that did responsive images using Cloudinary, using fetch. Mm-hmm. And the first two requests that I got were, one, how do I make this work locally and not just when it's live on the internet? And then the second was, what if I don't actually want to keep all my images in my GitHub repository?
Oh, nice.
Want to have them actually be in Cloudinary. We're 2 or 3 years on, and I've solved neither of those issues. So I'm glad you at least solved one of them for everybody here.
Yeah, and this has been solved a lot of ways. And by solved, I mean that one of, I want to use fetch, but I can't locally. I need a different story for local. And so we talked about Eleventy a bunch, and it's not the only technology that could solve this problem. Of course not, right? But I guess the way that I ended up doing it was that Eleventy has these like data abilities. It's kind of like probably the coolest trick that Eleventy has really is that you can set up these, because ultimately it's an HTML processor, right? It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't care about your JavaScript. It doesn't care about your CSS. It's just for processing your HTML files. And it supports all these different formats, like it's liquid or whatever I think is the default one. I almost always pick Nunjux because I have more, history using that syntax, which is like a HTML preprocessor from Mozilla. And in that syntax, because I'm now writing in like .njk files or whatever, I get these double curly brace things in which to do HTML templating. And it's super flexible, but I can just set them up anywhere. They could be node and environment variables, or you can make these files that are like data.js files, or I forget exactly where they go and how it works in Eleventy, but it's very natural feeling. The variables that are set up in JavaScript that expose themselves to the HTML processing. So I can do stuff like, I'm going to, set up my name Chris, and now Chris is available in double curly brackets to all my templates. So I can go curly bracket Chris, and it will spit out Chris Coyier or something. It's just like templating available. It just feels very natural and nice. So in this case of connecting local development and Cloudinary and all that stuff, I basically take that fetch URL that I have for Cloudinary and make it a variable. And so then when I do in my HTML, I'm literally about to put an HTML or an image into my HTML, image source equals, and I need to put the source to the image. I can put like curly bracket, Cloudinary fetch URL goes here, then the actual path to the image after that. And so on local development, I can code it up such that Cloudinary fetch URL is nothing, blank, an empty string, nothing. And so on local, it's just the relative file path to the image. Great. And then on production, I can change an environment variable. And there's a bunch of ways to do that, but it's pretty simple and normal everyday thing that people do. In my case, I tell Netlify, which is the thing that will run my build process before my code goes out to production. I put like capital like env equals production, then run Eleventy, and that like yelly all caps thing sets an environment variable that says this is production. And in my data files, it's like, okay, well, in the case that it's production, I want that Cloudinary URL to be this fetch URL thing. So now all of a sudden, on all my templates that use image source equals whatever, all of a sudden all the images are prefixed with the fetch URL then. So it's cool. So local development, no fetch URL. Production has the fetch URL. It's really as simple as that. It's not a terribly complicated thing, but it just means then in production you get advantage. You can totally take advantage of all Cloudinary has to offer, and on local, nobody has to worry about it or think about it. And in fact, I think most people that contribute to this project, they have no idea that's what's happening.
Chris, I'm dying to see it. Is there any way you can show us some of the things that
Well,
you
the
just walked
website
through?
itself looks like this. So here's all these coding fonts. You can scroll up and down. It's a list. There's probably 3 times that many in the world. Again, remember, we were trying to scope it down to ones that are kind of good. Although one of the first pull requests was Comic New here, which is kind of like a Comic Sans looking coding font. Maybe not an everyday one, but
Comic Sans means fun.
Yeah, it could be worse. This is not a live code editor. I don't know if that was the greatest try. Another option is to not serve these as images would be to have him just embedded the font and show the dang thing with the real font. There's some advantages to that. I mean, then people could see how it actually renders on their machine and all that. We just picked not doing this, partly because it was meant to be a blog post where you'd never be able to do that, really. And 2 was that some of these fonts cost money. One of my favorites is Mono Lisa. I love this font. That's one of my favorites. My favorite before that, and I still switch back and forth, honestly, was Operator Mono. I really just love these 2 fonts. Both of them straight up cost money. And I would have to buy a license just to use them on this site. And I was like, no. I don't like this site that much that I'm going to spend money on buying a license just for this little microsite. Like, that's not happening. And I wanted to open that door for any. Yeah, they're kind of a lot. Operator Mono is like $300 or something. Mono Lisa's maybe like $100 or something. So I'm changing between HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then an output of just the characters and some comparison and stuff. And in fact, there's some interesting open issues now with suggestions from font authors on how we might change some of this for the better. But see, all 8 of these, and by 8 I mean HTML, CSS, JavaScript characters in both light and dark mode. So each font has 8 images for it. And so this is not live code. You can't edit it and play with it. Like I said, just for licensing reasons, we thought this would be easier to do. So that's still, it's as many fonts as there are in this list times 8 canonically. And then much more than that when you factor in responsive images. So I'm on production here. So if I look at the source code for the image, you'll see that it has the source set syntax. All of them use the Cloudinary fetch URL at different sizes. It looks like it went 1600, 1200, and 600, whatever. Again, I just guessed at those numbers kind of thing. But see how, if this gets loaded then at a super small iPhone size or something, and with caching off here, it probably that's terrible how small it looks, but I'm sure in real life, I'm sure it looks a little bit more readable when it's really close to your face and all that. So, in this real life situation, somebody busts open their phone, visits this URL, they're probably going to get the 600 width version of this image, thanks to Cloudinary Fetch, The original isn't that size, but that's what's going to get requested. So that was the whole point of this little journey. In fact, I don't know if the video picked it up, but I saw real quick when I turned off DevTools and I went back to the size that this was a little blurry just for a second, and you saw the browser request the higher res version of it. So because the caching was off on that and it requested the smaller image, and then all of a sudden the image got much larger because I'm just displaying it larger, I could see that kind of behind the scenes magic work.
Do you have the code, the GitHub code that shows how you set up that templates and
there's a blog post that kind of goes into the details of the specifics. Is probably more worth looking at, but it is available on GitHub here too. We'll dig into the source real quick, see if I can actually find what I'm talking about. Go into source and then underscore data. This is how Cloudinary exposes that data to its templates before it processes them. So when you do module.exports, anything that's in images.js or foo.js or cloudinary.js or whatever gets then exported, and you can use images.image location, images.url prefix, those just become available to your HTML preprocessors. So I could have just done module.exports, in names.js, Chris is Chris or something, and then I have that available. Hopefully that wasn't too obtuse, but all 4 of these things then become available to my templates to use. And notice I'm testing to see if I'm in production or not. It tests to see if the production environment variable is true, And if it is, then what is this? And it's not the deploy preview. That's a little fancy dance we had to do to make sure that Netlify's developer previews also didn't use Cloudinary fetch, even though it looks like it's production and Cloudinary is doing the build. I didn't want Cloudinary to pull from those production previews in Netlify. Like those are still kind of like localhost. It's not till they get to really truly production where we kind of unleash the beast here. And then Cloudinary fetch URLs are not query parameters. They happen in the middle of the URL for whatever reason. I'm sure you all have good reasons for that, but at least then it's one prefix. I don't have to put the fetch and then the resource and then query parameters at the end of it. So in a way, it's kind of convenient that they're not query parameters. But it makes 3 of them, and then I use them in the templates. Font page. Yeah, this. Oh, yeah, look at that. I found it right away. Here's where the actual image gets output, and it has the prefix, large, medium, and small. Then it outputs the location, which would either be, again, with the Cloudinary fetch URL, it needs a fully qualified URL to pull from. I can't put the fetch URL and then put a relative path. It needs to have the full-on http://codingfonts.css-tricks. It needs the whole thing, not just the relative file path, which is the rest of this. And then I have to, cobble together the rest of the Puppeteer makes those 8 screenshots, and they're named in a special way. They're named HTML/light or dark, So this feels more complicated than it is really, but it's just cobbles together the correct paths in either production or development for where those images are. I guess these 3 lines of code are basically what brought us here today. This is why I've brought you all here together.
So two cool Cloudinary things I want to call out. One is that I saw in your the fetch prefixes that you're writing, you're using fauto qauto, which is a particularly cool combination. That means that even though these images that get stored from Puppeteer are PNGs, correct?
Probably. I think so, yeah.
They
won't be served as PNGs, right? They'll be served as probably WebP or whatever fancy thing y'all are doing these days.
Yeah, they get served as PNG when it makes sense for them to be served as PNG. But if you load this up in Chrome right now, and I just dragged one to the desktop, and I got a WebP, and I think it was a lossless WebP.
Let's see. Me too. But, yeah, that's
cool.
And we could see that happening, couldn't we? In DevTools here, look at them all: WebP.
All WebPs. And, maybe next year those will be AVIFs, right? Like you won't have to change your code at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask you all about that. Some people are getting on board with that, but it doesn't. I'm sure that takes some complicated engineering effort to get there, huh?
You can play around with it right now. If you wanted to, make a fork of this and change all your extensions to .avif, we'll render them and you can send them to.
Really? Will this work?
To Chrome anyway. Yeah, that'll work. No, why won't it work? Oh, well. If you do fauto, change it to favif.
Nice. See, and there's a little bit of spinning. This is what I've seen this too, because I've used another service that does them for you. It takes a hot second to make an avif, doesn't it?
Literally a hot second if you're by the machine that's doing it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it requires a little juice to get those done. That's cool though. Let's compare the sizes just for fun. We got the WebP and the avif. I'm only sharing my browser when you can't see it. So the avif was 49K and the WebP is 37K. So in this case, the WebP won. So if I was using Cloudinary, I would trust that fauto would know to serve the WebP anyway, because in this case, WebP won. That's what's so tricky about this new world to me, that I don't trust myself to get right, is that I need something else to decide which one is better. Because it's not, I think avif wins a lot, but not always, right? Something needs to decide. Yeah.
Our life got a lot more complicated. It used to be there was a one-to-one map between browsers and the ideal format for that browser. If you're in Chrome, serve a WebP. If you're in Safari, serve a JPEG 2000. That's no longer the case. Now you have Safari supporting WebP, and pretty soon I think most browsers are going to support avif. And so our decision trees are getting a little bit more complicated.
But that's tremendous value from the Cloudinary perspective, because I don't want to ever have to make that call. That is not appealing to me, because the responsive images syntax I already don't like. I already don't want to be responsible for that. I don't want to.
How did you write that? How did you write that sizes, by the way?
I don't even know, Eric. I probably asked you.
No.
But you have helped me with that in the past. Sizes,
Yeah.
I hate even more than source set. I don't say hate. I think it's fun to play with this, but I think that's a lot to ask an author to figure out what the perfect source set and size is. And this is one image in one layout. If your website is more complicated and I decided to put an image over here in the sidebar, this is all wrong. All of it is wrong. And you have to do it again and figure it out. I just don't like it. I want to put image source equals, mycoolimage.jpg in whatever I link to it from. And I don't care if I have to pay for Cloudinary to get it. It should do all the stuff. It should be in the right format. It should serve the right size. It should be optimized perfectly. It should know that it doesn't need to render at all because it's it's under the fold or something.
Right.
I want the best. I want everything, and that's just pie in the sky. So it's just fun to think about, I'm not like demanding it of the world. I just think, images are heavy and there would just be a lot of value to the world if this stuff got even simpler than it is. I'm so glad we were able to pull this off so far. But what we were saying about images is this would get, 4 times more complicated if I also then had to do the format changes too. And I couldn't even use image. I'd have to use picture. Because picture is the one that is capable of changing the format. Image source set is not. And so that's just way more verbose.
Super verbose. Yeah.
I'd probably punt on it. I probably wouldn't even do it. I'd be like, screw it.
Yeah. Your friend Dave Rupert, I believe that's what his responsive image solution is. Send a 1.5x to everybody, right?
Yeah. Kapunt. The least you can do, though, is just prefix it with the Cloudinary thing with fauto, qauto. Because you get a ton of value from that. You get more value than that than from responsive images on the whole. I think you taught me that. Or at least maybe not blanketly true, but is often true. Serving an optimized, correctly formatted image, you get more value out of on the whole than serving the right sized image.
Yeah, often true. Have you done any performance tracking to take a look at what Cloudinary is actually doing for you here, or how these pages actually perform? I assume they're like lightning fast.
I just kind of trust it, I don't know what to tell you, but it's like it's on a CDN and it's serving the images on a right size. There's no way that's not delivering value, this is on Netlify, so all the rest of the resources have come from Netlify. Netlify is also incentivized to do a good job for that stuff, but they can't do the same with images as you can. They're not changing the format of images automatically for you. That's not happening. But no, I can't compare it. It'd be kind of interesting to turn it on and turn it off and do an A/B. It would be tremendously easy to do because you just, I wonder if this shows too much or not, but who cares? Let's go for it.
Couldn't help it. I just ran Lighthouse on it, and it's like really high performance.
It's good? Oh, good. No thanks to me. I've never run Lighthouse on it. I'm terrible. But you can see what I mean here. Like I can just change the build command. I could say prod equals false, deploy it, check it, change it back to prod 2, check it again. That'd be pretty easy to do.
So one thing that I think I'm trying to take away from this, because I've seen lots of amazing work that you've ultimately done, but let's say that I'm someone that's kind of just getting into understanding how static site generators work, how Jamstack projects work. I'm kind of just putting my toe into this water. What do you recommend if someone wants to do something like what you're doing, talking about working with images in this way? What steps would you recommend for them to take?
That's a good, you're going to have images in your product, your thing probably anyway. Like you just, most websites have some images on them. So I'd get that local dev story right first, like pretend that you're not using anything at all. You're just linking up your images normally like you are. And that doesn't hurt to be aware of then what's possible with images, It's like, just get it all working first. And then run Lighthouse or whatever, or know that you're probably not doing enough with images. That feeling will probably never go away because nobody has the perfect images set up. But just know that you're like, oh, shoot, all I'm doing is linking up a PNG here. Shouldn't I at least optimize that PNG? Yeah, maybe you could wire up some kind of thing with your setup that makes sure that PNG is optimized. But, these days, PNG is almost certainly not the best format you could serve in production. So how am I going to do that? Just know that you're probably doing it wrong. And then look into options for serving the correct format. And then be like, well, I'm probably serving it's too big. No, what are my options for serving differently sized images for different devices? You just know in your head mostly that there's always something better you can do with your images, and look into whatever it takes to do it better, knowing that some of those things might kind of be production only things that you can do. But don't sacrifice the simplicity of your project for it. Don't don't shoot yourself in the foot and do something that's too complex to be worth it. All this stuff is a trade-off. Knowing that you're never going to achieve a perfect images setup, even doing anything at all to make it better is nice. It's kind of like that with accessibility too. I mean, you should probably put a lot of effort into that, but it's probably not going to be right for everybody all the time. So the least you can do is make it a little bit better when you can.
I feel like there's this kind of guilt that we all share as web developers about the size of our images. And it's not the first focus.
I really care about the workflow, and I want to get down to the point where I can, on my Mac, I can get Command-Shift-4 and I can take a screenshot and it'll just show up on my desktop. That image is a PNG and it's probably huge. It's probably 2 megabytes, But I don't want any step between using that image on the web and my having taken it. If I'm writing a blog post, just take it and just drag it onto my blog post, and the computer magic should happen, and it should serve it perfectly from the other side out. That's how much the workflow matters to me. I don't want to be stop in the middle of writing a blog post and be like, oh, I better trim that down and save it in the right format and optimize it and then manually upload it to some other place. No, I want super speed, super workflow.
One last question. When are custom coding fonts coming to CodePen?
You can't upload your own, but I think everyone that's my favorite is already there. So if you go into CodePen and go to your editor settings, I think there's about 10 in there these days.
Okay.
Mono Lisa and Operator Mono among them. Two of my favorites, but I know there's more. In fact, let me just see the list for you here real quick.
I can't use Comic New though.
No, that one's we've passed on making that one available. JetBrains Mono is on the list though. That one got really popular this year, so I know a lot of people like that one. It's free, people like the free ones. Can't blame them.
So Chris, if people wanted to learn more about just what you're up to, see the next project that you're going to be working on, where do they go?
Oh, I keep a personal site. I'm a big fan of having a personal blog. So it's my name, which is chriscoyier.net in this case. And that's kind of my personal blog, but of course links to all the other projects that I do, and has some, things that I would demand that you do, like upgrade to Pro on CodePen, obviously. And it links to a bunch of other sites that I think are cool too, because I have a blog role now.
Of course, Eric, because this is going to be a guest appearance for you. It's wonderful that you've been with us for this one. Is there any place that people can be going to be just seeing all the things that you're doing for Cloudinary, or just projects that you want people to be learning more about?
I don't know. You can go to my personal website, which I am terrible at updating, ericportis.com. If you really want to be in the know, look at my activity on GitHub and see all the obscure browser issues I'm chiming in on and trying to keep track of. For the super fans.
Yeah.
As you can see, Chris is somebody that has the gift of gab. He was able to talk a lot about his project, which was so helpful for this episode, but there's also a lot of things that, as we've mentioned, he just knows about the web. He knows about what it comes to when it comes to building websites, building apps, building interesting projects. So there's a lot of things that we can take away from this episode. Becky, what were some of those for you?
Well, one thing was, we have a number of ways at Cloudinary that you can get an image into Cloudinary so that you can use some of the optimization, such as the formats and the quality control, things like that. And what I really liked was the way that Chris sort of hijacks other URLs using the Cloudinary fetch. Is if he can grab that URL and attach it to his cloud's domain, he can actually take advantage of all transformations available at Cloudinary, but in particular, he can do his optimization that way. And so I think this is a technique that is beneficial to a lot of people. And Cloudinary will let you do, you can upload a remote URL and have that image sitting there in your cloud. You can use auto upload fetch, where you're doing some mappings and preparing ahead of time. But Chris has used one of our features, fetch, to just grab that URL on the fly and do his optimization. So I really like that, from a training point of view, that is something that we really want to communicate. And I think this is a good example of it.
I completely agree. And it is one of those cases where when we're talking with people that are using Cloudinary, whether they're a customer or sometimes even our various partners, they are asking, what should I be doing? Should I be doing just a standard upload? Should I be uploading from a remote URL? Should I be pulling from local source? Should I be using this fetch technology that you have? So I think what this really highlights is that fetch can be a really good use case for a project. And it definitely shows how this can be also extremely helpful when you are doing things where a server is not involved in any way. Going and pulling something like you have with fetch can be a really good, useful tool. So I was really happy to see what Chris was able to share with that. And I think there's a lot of innovation there. But what's also interesting about it to me is that, kind of as a teaser, but in our next episode, we're even going to be talking about more ways that people are utilizing serverless functions like we were seeing with Netlify, seeing some of the ways that people are using fetch, but instead of using it for external images like we were showing with the situation where we saw the code samples, this is now or the font samples in that case. But we're going to be doing it for more things that are kind of behind the scenes, like open graph images to help highlight some of those blog posts. So there's just a lot that can ultimately be unpackaged with how fetch is being used, but also how Puppeteer is being used too.
Yeah, Puppeteer is really neat. I mean, that's kind of an understatement almost, because when I first learned about it, it was in doing end-to-end testing. So, Puppeteer could take snapshots, you'd run your test, click a few buttons, run it all the way back to the database, bring back the data, and then you take a snapshot, and it was set up so that you could visually diff your end results. I mean, and that was really cool. But now we're seeing Puppeteer used to take screenshots for many different interesting things, and in this case, rather than going into maintaining code inside your Jamstack pages, just take a snapshot, optimize it, and load it. And I think that's really neat. I mean, to start getting into using images, and being able to take pictures, essentially, because Puppeteer is like this headless Chrome, you can do actually tons with it. But this ability to take pictures, it allows you to create your own URL to image service. And so I got inspired, and I actually went out, I said, I got to see how this works. And what if I wanted to do a purely front end? Because sometimes I don't like to set up authentication. I don't want to deal with tokens and all that. And Cloudinary has this unsigned preset authentication. So I can just go into my Cloudinary account, create a named unsigned preset. And I've sort of got, if anyone knows that particular name, they could go to my front end and use it. So I have this little app, and I want to make a screenshot. So let's just do Cloudinary. Say I'm like a baseball card collector, but I collect images of people's screens, I don't know. Actually, what is the best use case? I don't really have one. I just wanted to play around. So, and my cloud name. So I have a cloud out there on Cloudinary, my account called Picture Cloud 7. Okay. And then I created an unsigned preset, and I'll have to destroy this after showing this because I don't want anyone to start using this particular preset. And that's my authentication. It's simple in Cloudinary as, going to your settings, doing a little bit of upload, coming down and creating unsigned preset. So real easy to set up. But now that I have this, and I've got this app, and I can show you some of that. I've got a Netlify Lambda function, serverless function, that is going to take a picture for me, and it's going to send me back the base 64 data. So many ways I could have configured this. I could have, actually done the upload on the back end, but here I'm doing it on the front end. I'm just letting my Netlify function take a picture and then send it back. upload comes back and I get the URL and I post it here. And then if I go to my Cloudinary account, I've got that picture uploaded. So easy way for me to start my collection of screenshots. And the code is so simple. I mean, I'm just using straight JavaScript HTML, but because I'm using Netlify, I can create this Lambda function and I can then bring in Chromium. I can have it set up this backend browser, take the picture, pull in my base64 image, and then just return that image to my front end. So that is one way to do it. Obviously, you could have the backend do the upload, but again, you'd want to set up more advanced authentication.
This is showing, once again, that Puppeteer is a fantastic tool. And I really do think that more developers should be taking the time to go through it, because now we can see with Chris, as well as this project that you've gone and built, there's lots of opportunities to do interesting things with it. What I also just love about this is now it's showing two ways, because we showed that Chris had gone and has all the code available on his GitHub. We're going to make the code available for your project available in this way. So now we'll get some more flavors. And as we also said, Puppeteer is going to be something we focus on in our next episode, where we're going to be talking with somebody that's using this for open graph images. So you're going to have lots of different ways to see how Puppeteer and Cloudinary, as well as Netlify, can all play together in interesting ways. So this is going to be something that I think, as a developer, if you wanted to learn about this, we're going to have a lot of resources available to you.
Yeah, and I hope that this episode helps people to kind of get a hint at some very, great functionality that they can now dig into. These are like tools in a toolkit, and then when you're trying to build something new or solve a problem, you can kind of think about these techniques.
Absolutely. Now, a couple closing notes here before we end our episode. Of course, if you are watching this on the Cloudinary Academy, we're very happy about that, because Becky and I spend a lot of time developing coursework and tutorials and running classes that are associated with our overall academy. So thank you for doing that. And if you like and share this episode in that way, so if you like it personally, you decide to share it on a social network of your choice, like Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, send us a link to that share. And you can just simply do that by emailing support@cloudinary.com. Once they receive it, they'll increase your Cloudinary plan credit by 1 credit, which will help with just those little bits of bandwidth overages or storage or transformations you have when you're working on that next big project. Lastly, if you're watching this somewhere else other than the Cloudinary Academy, that's great too. And make sure that you are liking and subscribing on that channel so you get immediate notifications when we put out the next episode of DevJams and all future content coming from Cloudinary that's video-based. Becky, anything else you want to tell our listeners or viewers before we let them go?
Well, just that if you like this episode, stay tuned for the next one, because we do another twist on this. Completely
agree. Come back. We've got more for you. And thank you again. Thank you again. This is an initial program. This is something where this is only episode 2, and we hope to have hundreds of these, frankly. So thank you for being part of this initial journey, talking with our developer community about all things that they're doing with Cloudinary for their personal, professional, hobbyist projects.